Welcome to Unit 2 in Technical Communication 2700. In this unit, we are going to learn about document design, and the way we're going to do that is by you creating a resume and also creating a LinkedIn profile that you will be able to take with you after you leave this class to prepare you for your internship and your job search. So in this lesson, we're going to talk specifically about your resume and discuss how you can brand yourself to help you get the jobs that you want once you start looking for internships or graduate from UNT. So the first thing that we will talk about, if it'll let me switch, there we go. All right, is do you recognize these brands? So whenever we talk about branding yourself, kind of think about what that means in the context of a brand in general. So you can obviously see Coca-Cola, which is spelled out, so you know that it's Coca-Cola because it tells you it's Coca-Cola. Whereas Apple, you see that there's an apple here, so you know that it's an apple, but if you were completely unfamiliar with Apple as a brand, you might not know that that is their brand. However, most people know of Apple, and they know that seeing that specific apple with the bite taken out of it indicates that it is for Apple products. Trader Joe's is pretty recognizable among a lot of people. Their brand is obviously grocery shopping, but they do things a little bit different within their company. It's kind of an interesting company if you learn about it. But there's also Toyota down at the bottom, Microsoft, and then the Nike swoosh, which is one of the kind of big brand stories where people have just come up with a very abstract design that has ultimately ended up being a huge part of what their brand is. So whenever you see all of these are really logos. So these don't necessarily represent what the brand of these different companies is. For instance, if you think about Apple, we learn a lot about how they manage their staff, right? And Google is a very similar situation. Where their staff have very flexible work schedules, creativity is key to what it is that they're doing. They have, you know, like in Google, they're really well known for having like free food all the time and ping pong tables, and, you know, people have nap pods, and there's all of these things that they do to help generate kind of the work that goes on within their company. Nike, of course, like part of their brand is sports. Right, that's the idea. Just do it. It's all sports related. Even though people wear Nike clothing whenever they are not participating in sports, that is still part of their brand. So you can see that these are the different logos, but a brand is much more than just the logo. It's really kind of the company, what it stands for, and what people think about it whenever they interact with that company. So based on what we just discussed, think about these two different stores. So you have Target and you have Walmart. They're both stores that carry lots of different items, right? So they have clothing, they have food at most of their locations, they have housewares, they have all different types of items, a lot of them similar. Target obviously doesn't do automotive, Walmart does in some locations, but still overarchingly, the things that they offer in like kind of a very top level view are similar. However, if you walk into a Target, it's a much different feeling than if you walk into a Walmart. Walmart wants you to feel like you are in a warehouse because they want you to think that you're in a very large building, you're getting a great deal. There's not a lot of decoration that goes on in a lot of their stores, though they've kind of gotten better about that. Whereas when you walk into Target, it's usually quieter. Because it's not the same warehouse feel with the high ceilings and everything being, you know, pretty industrial in their design. The shopping carts are vastly different at Target and Walmart. My husband and I, when we were dating, we walked into Target and he hadn't been in a really long time, and I had him push the cart and he just couldn't believe how smooth the cart was. Whereas at Walmart, you know, people joke about how the carts are very loud or rickety or whatever. So even the carts are different between the two different stores. Walmart very often has a lot of people. Target sometimes does, of course, if it's a very busy season, if they're, Black Friday, that sort of thing. But they're just kind of two different experiences whenever you go into the store. People also pay more at Target. I usually, when I walk into Target, know that I'm going to spend at least $40. sometimes not even on things I was expecting to buy, because they market things really well. They put them in nice displays. They put things on the end caps that you really want to buy. So between these two different companies, they have very different brands. They have different things when you walk in their stores. They have their, employees are different. Their corporate cultures are different, even though they offer overarchingly very similar things. So let's talk about typography. So these are some different fonts. They're all in the same size and they all say exactly the same thing. So whenever we look at these, they may inspire you to have certain feelings or make you think certain things, right? Like the first one is a sans serif font, meaning that it doesn't have, I don't know if you can see my cursor, but it doesn't have the little feet on it that the next font does, right? So whenever you look at that font, you might think that it looks professional. You might think that it looks like something that might be displayed on a screen. That's kind of what I think of. The second one looks more like text that would be maybe in a book, right? Like if you're reading a book, hardback book, or even on a Kindle or something like that, you might see this type of font in a book. It looks very classic, whereas maybe the first one looks a little bit more modern. The third one is a script font. So you can see that it's, much smaller, it's written in cursive. And so maybe the brand of that might be romantic, or it might be, something for wedding invitations, something along those lines. So you wouldn't necessarily choose that font to write an entire book in because it would be very difficult to read, but you might put it on something where it's a fancy event or something like that. And then the last one is a classic. It's Comic Sans, and it's the font that everyone loves to hate. But you might think that it looks childish, right? You might think that it looks unprofessional, whereas maybe the first two fonts look more professional. And I'll include a joke here, but you can see there that somebody has used Comic Sans for a sign, and then there's a joke placed underneath it because Comic Sans just overarchingly has a bad reputation. I would definitely recommend, as you're writing your resume, do not include Comic Sans because you'll probably get laughed out of the room. However, interesting fact, Comic Sans is good for people who have dyslexia because the letters are all different sizes and they're all like at different angles. You can kind of see here that they're at a little bit different angles, so it's easier for some people with dyslexia to read it. So this just kind of demonstrates how different typographies have different feelings and kind of establish a different idea whenever you view them. So now let's talk about people. And you might read this and say, well, people don't have brands, right? People aren't companies. But people do establish kind of what their brand is by the way that they live their lives and by things that happen to them when they are living, by the way that they present themselves to the public. So people absolutely can have brands. So you'll see Abraham Lincoln there on, I believe it'll be on your left like it is for me. And one of the things people talked about with him was that he was Honest Abe, right? He was a president. And so because he was a president, because he was a lawyer, because he, was president during the Civil War, he gave the Emancipation Proclamation, all of these things that he did kind of establish what his brand is as a person. He was from the Midwest, so some people might think that that was part of his brand, right? Then you look in the middle and you see Kim Kardashian, which she and all of her family have established individual brands, not just companies, but their own brand, right? Like everything that she wears is neutral colors, for instance. She has started, several different companies and it's all along the same aesthetic. All of the things that she promotes end up being, some color beige or brown or, blush pink or whatever else. So by doing all of that, she has established a brand of herself. And on the right is Michael Jordan, who of course has a brand as a basketball player. He is a businessman. He has, a lot of different qualities and things that he's done in his life that have kind of established him as a brand and like being a person. And he, interestingly, has become a brand and a logo in and of itself, right? He's one of the richest people in, I don't know if he's one of the richest people in the world, but certainly one of the most successful, or people have been financially successful with partnering with a company, right, with Nike. So they've made a ton of money. And so there's his silhouette, which is a brand. And then more recently, the crying Jordan meme, which, people started sharing on the internet after he, they have this still footage of him crying, and he even commented on this at Kobe Bryant's funeral, because it's become such a part of now kind of his brand and who he is in the stratosphere of the internet, that he even commented on it himself at Kobe Bryant's funeral. And so while that doesn't necessarily establish who he is as a human being, it certainly has become part of what people know him for. So this quote I kind of liked, and it says, when we talk about personal branding, we're referring to establishing and promoting what you stand for. Your personal brand is the unique combination of skills and experiences that make you, you. Effective personal branding will differentiate you from other professionals in your field. So whenever you kind of pull that apart a little bit, you are trying to, with your brand, you are sharing, and within the context of a resume, you want to display to them who you are through words on a paper document. And the best way to do that is to talk about what you stand for, your unique combination of skills and the experiences that make you who you are and therefore valuable to the company that you're applying to. So some of the values of branding your resume is it distinguishes you from the other people around you. So like we talked about the different logos in these different companies and what they're branding, or, kind of what the idea is, or the feeling that they, bring up in people when they walk into a Target store versus a Walmart. So companies rely on branding, and so you should do the same thing while you're seeking jobs, because it's going to make people view you differently than other applicants who are looking for the same types of jobs you are. And since no two brands, whether it's corporate or personal, are the same, your brand is as unique as you are. And you might think of yourself as maybe being kind of a normal person. I certainly think that about myself. Like, there's a lot of things about me that are really not that notable. And you might think the same about yourself. But there are things about you now in your life that can make you stand out in a job search. And so we'll talk about how to highlight some of those on your resume a little bit later. So one of the things that, or the two things that you really have to do in this unit for assignments are you need to create a resume and you need to create a LinkedIn profile. You're also going to identify a job posting, whether it's an internship or a full-time job position that you want to apply for, right? So those are kind of the three things you have to do. You find this potential job, make a resume, make a LinkedIn. So before you start this process, I really recommend that you take 5 minutes to write down some of the things that you have within you, your skills, your qualifications, your personality, things like that, that can contribute to your brand and therefore help you find a job. So think about things like, what are your strengths? What will employers value about you and your work? And then if you don't have a lot of job experience, have you been involved in clubs or organizations? Are you active in maybe a church? Were you captain of your volleyball team in high school? Do you work at maybe a summer camp? Like, all of these things that you have gained, even if it's just working at McDonald's for a summer, if you were given extra responsibilities because you did a great job, that would be something to note. If you got Employee of the Week nomination at the job you had, of course you would include that. But you'll think really hard about all of the skills that you've gained, the recognitions that you received, and that can help you as you complete your resume. So resume format will include a few standard things. The first thing is the header, which is the part that's at the top that includes the name, address, phone number, email. So that part is important on a resume, especially the part where you have your name and your contact information. Some people don't include address, which is totally fine, unless, of course, the job application says you have to. But in your header, you might just want to include your phone number so they can call you for an interview and your email address. My resume also includes my web page, because I have a website technically that demonstrates some of the things I've accomplished in my career. So that's something you could definitely include. The second piece is a summary. And so the summary is going to be a very brief section that includes either phrases or complete sentences, depending on how you want to do it, to demonstrate your skills, the things that you have. Like here you can see that Rebecca included that she's a network engineer with 5 years of experience. So she's including two very important pieces of information right there at the beginning of the summary. And so it just gives kind of a snapshot of what you've done in your career and some of your skills that you've acquired potentially, or things that you've done in your career so far. Then there's a skills section. Your skills section will include like any technical skills that you have. If you understand Python, if you maybe speak foreign languages, different things that like skills that you've acquired. If you're really great with Microsoft Excel, whatever it is, that would go in the skills section. And then your experience section will demonstrate all of the work experience that you've had so far. So you should include the date, your start and your end date for that job so they can see how long you were there. The name of your job title, the company you worked for, and the location. And then you will then include bullet points or list out in some capacity, but usually bullet points are how you do it. All of the experience and the things that you did while you were at that job. So you will use like verbs whenever you start this out. Like you can see that she has made them all the same verb tense, right? They're all past tense. So she employed knowledge, she determined which network devices would be used, she maintained communication, and she performed and documented network operations, right? So she's listing out the things that she did when she was at that job. So you start out with an action verb to demonstrate what it was that you actually did at that job. Usually you would want to list these in reverse chronological order because the job that you're doing now is probably the one that's most connected to the job that you're applying for. Some people will go like here, they did it in chronological order instead of reverse chronological. And so they have listed them from start to finish. But if you think about somebody who maybe, like if you're now 21 years old and you've been working since you were 16 and you've had 5 jobs, it's unlikely that your very first job is the most important job, right? Not that you would necessarily include all of your jobs, but just to kind of indicate what I mean here. So the job you've had most recently, if it was an internship in technology and you want to work in technology, that would obviously be the one you would want to list first. And then you'll also include your education and whatever training you have. So that would include like your bachelor's degree. If you have gotten maybe at a community college, you got certifications for certain types of like Cisco or something like that, and that's relevant, you can include that here. Typically, if you've got a college degree, you would not include anything below your college degree. So you wouldn't put like what what high school you graduated from. That would not be relevant here. It would just be your anything you've gotten after high school. Community college, if you finished an associate's degree and you want to include that, you definitely can. But a lot of times if they are seeking somebody with a bachelor's degree, unless your associate's is related to the job you're applying for, you may not need to include that either. And then the last section would be honors, awards, and recognition. So that would include like if you got Employee of the Month, if you were presented an award at a banquet for your student organization, that sort of thing. You can also include in there, you can actually include a different section if you want, because you can kind of change these up a bit. But like if you want to include all of your volunteer activities, then you could definitely put that in there if that was really relevant to you in your resume. So these are some kind of typical things that you would include, but really I would say your header, summary, skills, experience, and education are going to be really important. And then the rest of it you can play with a little bit based on what it is that you want to demonstrate. So there are 5 different resume branding strategies that I want you to think about while you're completing your resume. Number 1, identify your audience. Number 2, consider your selling points. 3, organize your information. 4, punch up your pros. And 5, create a visual hierarchy. So we'll go into more detail about what all of these mean, but I included a resume here that I think kind of demonstrates a little bit of kind of each of these factors, right? So it's very audience oriented. It includes the selling points and the things that she's done that are really valuable. She organized the information really well. The pros is great in this one, and also she's created a visual hierarchy. Like you can see all the different sections, areas of expertise, experience, education, it's all included in there. So step 1, identify your audience. So you need to figure out who's going to read your resume. Odds are the first entity that's going to look at your resume is going to be a computer software. Artificial intelligence is used quite a bit in the job application process. There's a lot of software that human resources professionals use to help identify the candidates that best fit the jobs that they have posted. Once it goes through the software, then somebody, like an individual person, will look at it. So this is where using things like keywords are really important, and making sure like your education is up to date on your resume and all of that, which we'll talk about a little bit more in a minute. So just know that it's going to maybe be a person, but it's also maybe going to, like, the first entity may be software. So you need to think about that whenever you're creating a resume. You need to research the employment outlook of the job in the field that you're applying in, companies and job postings, so that you have an idea of what the audience is looking for, especially like we talked about Apple, right? They, and Google and some of those very big, Microsoft, those big companies, they have very specialized corporate cultures. They will ask you crazy questions in interviews that you don't think related, but they're trying to figure out how you think about things. So understanding the company and understanding what the job is requiring is really important for you when you start to do a resume. And so what this means is you'll be writing a slightly different resume for every job you're applying for, which is not fun. Nobody likes it, but it's important, because if you're trying to get a job at Apple, which is very different from Microsoft, then you might want to include different keywords. You might want to organize things a little bit differently potentially. And then you need to ask yourself, are applicants who tailor their resume to your business more interesting than applicants who submit a form resume? And the answer to this is yes, it's better to tailor them, because a lot of job applicants will use templates, and they will just submit documents that look the same as every single other person. And that does not draw the attention of somebody who's got a stack of resumes in front of them. So, you know, maybe making your header a little bit more interesting, making sure that you kick off your resume with really valuable, relevant information is going to help you when people start looking at your documents. You need to consider your selling points as step 2. So you will consult the job posting, and you want to link what they want to what you've got. So on the right-hand side, you can see that there is a sample job posting. And so we're going to kind of talk about what it is that like you might want to include on here, or how you might want to organize your resume based on what this job posting is looking for. So if a company is indicating, and a lot of times in engineering and computer science, they're looking for a GPA of at least a 3.0, right? So if the industry that you're looking for jobs in says that you have to have a 3.0 or higher, if the job posting says you have to have a 3.0 or higher, you better include that GPA on your resume. If your GPA is below a 3.0 and you're applying in an industry that doesn't care about GPA, then you might not want to include it. If your GPA looks great on a document, then you should include it. But if the job posting specifically says that there is a required GPA, you probably should include your GPA on your resume, or they may not even look at it. You need to make sure that you include any internships that you had, or relevant job experience. If you're a campus leader, if you're an athlete, if you have fluency in a second language, any specializations or concentrations that you have that might distinguish you from somebody else, honors and awards, and then a graduate degree. If you have a graduate degree, make sure that you list that, right? And if they're looking for people in a master's program and you're graduating with a bachelor's, then you might need to consider that piece as well. So now we're going to look at the job posting that's here. So you want to approach the job posting like a hierarchy. So you can see here that what their goal is they're looking for interns. They're kind of describing what they're going to offer for interns, what the point is of having these interns. And they give some basic information about the job. And then they explain an overview of what these people will do. Then you go into the responsibilities, and this is the part that you'll focus on and that you have control over on your resume, right? So the intern will contribute to this company through the application of data science best practices and leveraging cutting-edge Luminant technology in a real-world environment. Okay, so that gives you an idea of what they want. So if you've got any of the things they're requesting here, data science experience, Luminant technology, then those keywords are really important to include. Then you look at the qualification, and they want somebody who's currently pursuing a master's degree in one of the STEM disciplines. So if you don't have that piece, if you are not a master's student and you are not in a STEM discipline, then this job posting is not for you. However, because they listed this first, you better make sure that on your resume it includes that you're a master's student and you list what your degree is so they know what it is that you're looking for. And you may go so far as to include your education first on your resume, because that's the most important piece of information to people at this company for this job posting. The second thing is they want you to have a good understanding of data analysis and statistics basics. So in that section at the the top where you're talking about your summary, where you start discussing what you've done at the jobs that you've been at or the classes that you've taken, data analysis and statistics better be on there. Next thing, hands-on experience with Python. So in that section where you're talking about your skills, better include Python. Good in qualitative and result interpretation, that better be on there as well. Ability to communicate results clearly, ability to work independently and collaboratively, and then strong verbal and written communication skills. So all of these are what people call soft skills, which are actually extremely valuable in the workplace, but you would need to include things like that. If you need to communicate results clearly and you've been responsible for reports that you've done for your lab or the reports that you did in your classes, then you should include that part, right? You could say something like effectively communicated results of labs to instructor, however it is you want to state that, but you can include those pieces in there as well. So these qualifications kind of give you a hierarchy of the pieces of information that they're looking for. So that's where you should start. Number 3, organize your information. So location is very important. So whenever people are looking at resumes, they're typically taking 10 to 15 seconds to scan the resume and decide whether you are somebody that they want to interview. I can speak from experience from being on hiring committees. It's a very quick look there at the resumes. If somebody's resume looks horrible, like they didn't put any time into it, even if they're qualified for the job, they're less likely to receive an interview because they didn't put in the time to apply for the job the way that they should, or the way a professional person should. So because people are taking 10 to 15 seconds, like in the previous example we looked at, your degree needs to be towards the top because that's very important to them. You need to include those keywords because those keywords are what they're looking for. You will see recruiters at career fairs that are going through resumes and circling all of the bits of information that are important to them, which may be programming languages, it may be knowledge about different technical things within whatever field you're in. If you're a marketing major, it might have something to do with your experience with marketing campaigns or social media or whatever. So make sure that that information is on the document, and make sure that whatever is above the fold, which is a newspaper term, but anything that's on the top half of the very first page of your resume, make sure that it includes all the things that people will want. And that's where the hierarchy is important. And so focusing above the fold, you don't need an objective statement, which is an old school thing. I don't know that any of you have ever been told this in the first place, but you don't need an objective statement. They don't need to know that. They do need to know what your summary is, or what your skills are, or what your education is. And then you also want to lead with action-oriented, with a brand statement. Hold on. Yeah, an action-oriented personal brand statement or summary that includes your relevant keywords and describes your value to your target employer. So that's that first section that we looked at in some of the documents that includes the summary. Number 4, punch up your pros. So you need to show them and not tell them about yourself. So as an example, boring would be hardworking person with great organizational skills. It doesn't demonstrate what actual skills that you have. Whereas a better statement would be elected chair of the Society of Hispanic Professional Engineers Budget Committee, oversaw the accounts of 24 members and a yearly budget of $32,000. So you don't need to tell them that you've got great organizational skills because you're managing a pretty large amount of money for a student organization of 24 members. So they know that there's quite a few of them and quite a bit of money involved. So they know that you are responsible because you were elected. People know you, they elected you. And then secondarily, you're managing a large budget. So that is a lot better example of a skill that you would have. Second example, responsible student. A better example of that would be took 60 credit hours over 2 years and maintained a 3.7 GPA. right? So you're not just telling them, I'm good, you know, I'm a responsible student, I do my things on time. And instead you can tell them, like, look at this GPA I got after completing all these credit hours. And then you need to remove statements like was responsible for or passive phrases, because you can switch those to be active verbs, or even if it's past tense, just an active verb, right? So instead of was responsible for, you could say managed or communicated or initiated. Like there's words like that that are a lot more active that are better. And then the last thing is create a visual hierarchy. And this is included in your design, the design portion of this module that you'll get to. So you need to avoid densely packed, hard to read information. You don't want big blocks of text. Instead, chunk information into relevant sections, use bullet points. Like in your summary section, you don't want that to take a full page. If you're applying for your first job, your resume should probably just be 1 page long as it is. So whenever you chunk the information and then you use headers and things like that to help people identify what you're explaining to them, that's really useful. You want to make sure the formatting is attractive, consistent, and clean. You don't want to use more than 2 to 3 different fonts, and those fonts need to work really well together. And you should use like serif fonts and sans serif, right? So you're looking at things more closely related to Arial and Times New Roman, right, than you would something that's a script font and obviously not Comic Sans. So I don't necessarily advocate for using the most popular fonts. I don't think that's relevant. My favorite font family that I use is Franklin, because they have a lot of different versions of it. But even with Arial, they have a lot of versions as well. So you have like their version that's bold, you have the version that's condensed, so there's a lot in there, but just make sure they work well together. You don't want to use a lot of graphic lines and a lot of underlining text, though graphic lines can be really effective in kind of separating information. I've done that in some of my resumes. And so remember, the skills hierarchy and the job posting should inform your visual hierarchy. So you've got to make sure that those 2 things match so that the people looking at your documents understand what you're trying to do. So final thoughts. Number 1 is don't be intimidated if you feel your job experience doesn't match the posting. If you're applying for your first job or your first internship and they're looking for somebody in your major who has Python skills and understands something about data science, and that's kind of generally what they're discussing, if you have those basic pieces, then you should apply. I'm not saying that you should apply for jobs that are obviously out of your league. Definitely apply for jobs that are within kind of your level of expertise. But you just need to make sure you connect your experience with what they require and make sure you meet the bare minimum qualifications of that job. If you have skills that are valuable, or hold on, let me start over. You have skills that are valuable to an employer. Really think about who you are and what you can do, and then show it on your resume. Even if you've never had a job, and like I mentioned earlier, or even if you just worked a summer at a grocery store in your small town where you're from, while you were there, you did things like cash handling, like, you know, maybe if you're stocking shelves or whatever it is, if you were really efficient or effective at that, if you ended up supervising people, if you ended up managing or training people, all of that information is relevant. So make sure that you include it. If you're applying for your full-time job and you've had a couple of internships and then you had, you know, maybe a few part-time jobs, include the part-time jobs that are really valuable to demonstrating the kind of person that you are and that support your brand. So if you work somewhere for a summer and didn't really get anything out of it, maybe don't include that. But if you work somewhere for a whole year and you ended up being, you know, maybe a shift manager, something like that might be useful. You don't have to include every bit of experience. That's why you might include something like relevant experience when you're listing out your jobs. Just keep in mind in this, especially going forward, people who hire often look for longevity at jobs. So they will view somebody who has been with, you know, if they leave jobs every 6 months, that means that they might be a flight risk. If they stay at jobs for 10 years and they don't advance the whole time that they're there, that may be an indication that the person isn't very motivated or isn't ambitious, right? So just really think about that when you're including your skills and your length of time on your resume. Whenever you did your discussion assignment for this module, you were asked to look at different resumes and then include your impressions of those resumes. You had to decide if it was effective or ineffective, right? And so odds are your first impressions of those documents is going to be similar to what a hiring manager's impressions would be, at least regarding the design of the document. So whenever you're looking at those, and you can maybe go back and look at them again, identify the things you like and the things that you didn't, and that can help guide you as you start your resume. And then lastly, do not forget keywords. It is really important, especially for those of you who will end up applying to big giant companies. If they're getting 800 applications for a single job, there's not somebody that's looking at each individual piece of paper, and you don't have any option to communicate with them aside from what's on your resume. So make sure you use your keywords, because that's going to help you get from step 1 to step 2, which would be a person looking at your resume that's going to give you a lot better shot at getting the job. So I know that this took a little while, but hopefully it'll help you. I'm going to post these slides as well, so that you can go back and look at information that might be useful to you. But I appreciate you listening. I look forward to seeing your resumes. Thanks, everyone.